Go up. Next level was the living quarters and kitchen. I slammed the trap door there, too, but it, too, was wood.
My blood. What are we going to do?
I don't know. We'll be through this one in a moment.
The gallery. The trap door in the gallery is metal.
Good. Come on. We made it. We lay across the trap door exhausted, while below us the rats took over the entire tower. I could hear them howling and fighting over our food supply, our water, our leather. And all about us, the others screamed and glared in at us, swayed in a tangled mass, hypnotized by the ever-turning light. By morning...
All right, we'll pause it there for a sec. So, again, the hero's darkest moment now. So, 3 intrepid lighthouse guys are stuck in there. The rats have gotten through, and they've eaten through all their stores. They're going to eat all their food, and they're now trapped in this moment in the lighthouse. Just kind of... Like, one of them has already been bitten by the rat.
Yeah.
Which has kind of put him
Horrible.
out. Yeah. And the other lighthouse keeper has kind of gone crazy by this point. He's kind of lost his mind. So both severely
He was like
damaged.
worshipping the rats or something, wasn't he?
That's right.
Something like that. He's like, you can't beat him, join him.
So tell me, in your own writing, so what we looked at previous, so we set this discussion up with 3 skeleton keys a while back, first talking about how inciting incidents can occur in storytelling. So we talked about the cliches here for 3 skeleton keys being, we have the setting of the lighthouse, spooky, then we have a kind of ghost ship or an abandoned ship hit the rocks, and then the inciting incident, the incident which kind of triggers this story forward, why we care about these lighthouse guys, is because this abandoned ship has disgorged its passengers of the swarm of rats. Which are then... So with your own work, for example, 2 Bodies, 3 Falls, was there an inciting incident? Was there something you can point to when you think of that story, which was the object, the event, the character issue, which then, ignited why everyone's coming together?
Absolutely. I tend to be an impatient author, so I try to write pretty fast-paced stories that just get into it and get going. So my inciting incidents usually happen in about chapter 1. For 2 Bodies, 3 Falls, the inciting incident is that the ghost, Marianne, catches a glimpse of this boy, Xander, who goes to university, and she falls in love with him, and she decides that she must have him. She cannot live without him. She will die. Again, she's already dead. She's a ghost. But metaphorically, she'll die if she doesn't have this boy. So what can she do about it? She's invisible. He can't hear her. He can't see her. So she steals a body of a girl, Evelyn, to go after Xander. And that's how you end up with 3 Falls in 2 Bodies.
So yes, the inciting incident can be both the kind of infatuation, the romantic glance that she saw of Xander.
Yeah.
Then the possession of the woman.
Yeah, and all of this happens in chapter 1.
Yeah. So you set it up so then Act 1 has that inciting incident.
Yeah.
And then Act 2 and 3 can unfold. So as we are at now with 3 Skeleton Key, where we've passed the midpoint, and I don't want you to spoil too much. Give some people some teasers to want to read 2 Bodies, 3 Falls.
Absolutely.
But the midpoint here, we've just passed, now we're reaching the 3rd act, and we're at this moment where all seems lost, right? That there's the plans our heroes have failed. Their plan to just bunker down has failed, and now it appears they will die. What were the stakes that your characters had? Was there a kind of like everything was lost moments, like in a romance? One might have that moment where I guess I'm thinking like Harry Met Sally, where they just separate. They just...
Oh, I haven't watched that movie in so long. It was very sad. That's a really interesting question. I think the stakes in this story are they're not as high as they could be. Like there's this sort of the quote unquote bad guys, the ghost mafia, all these like undead crime lords and stuff who are coming after Marianne the ghost and making her life difficult. They're sort of sinister, but they don't really accomplish anything. And it's sort of obvious from the start that, you know, they're more to be comic relief than villains, so I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that. And I did that on purpose because a lot of paranormal romance type books tend to be, they tend to involve sort of fantasy battles between good and evil, like, I don't know, witches and vampires and werewolves and whatever. I actually don't read that many of them. I've read like one paranormal romance, but they tend to be sort of Harry Potter-esque, like they bring in these supernatural bad guys and the world might end or people might die. I decided to keep my book pretty low-key by comparison, so there's this ghost mafia, but pretty much all they're doing is just inconveniencing everyone all the time. There's maybe some fights that break out and people get possessed and start fighting each other and things like that, but it's pretty obvious that the ghosts are so disorganized that they're not going to take over the world or even this city or anything like that. But the stakes are more personal for each of the three main characters involved. So Marianne the ghost, Xander the boy, and Evelyn the girl. They all have personal agendas. Maybe not Xander. I think Xander just wants to live a normal life and not be bothered by people. But they all have their own individual darkest hour, I think, when it seems like, it's just too much. Like Marianne's darkest hour sort of looks like, oh my gosh, what if everything that I've been working for is actually just too hard, or it's not obtainable, or the thing that I've been chasing after, is it even real? That probably happens around the third act of the book. And then a little bit earlier on, Evelyn's darkest hour is probably more like when, you know, her being possessed by Marianne leads to all these complications in her friendship with Xander, and it's looking like her life is just a real mess and she just can't do anything about it. Like she can't get the ghost out of her body. She's just sort of powerless, and I think she eventually hits this point where she goes, this is too difficult. Xander's darkest hour I will leave as a surprise.
Because it is interesting if the characters are able to just get what they want immediately. There's not really a story that's going to be interesting. So you can't have like the point at which she has fallen in love with Xander. Xander can't then just turn around and say, I love you too. Yeah. Done. As an author, you have to put these barriers in front of them as you're writing the story, and they kind of make them suffer. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the darkest hours they've gone through, because what I want to play a little bit of, as people know, over the last few weeks, I've been looking for some really nice theories of writing, of telling stories, which can be applied to understanding the radio dramas we've looked at. And one that I want to look at today is an author, Mary Robinette Cowell.
Oh, I know of her.
Oh, great. I hope I'm pronouncing it.
As far as I know.
Right. So she is giving this talk, which we'll have a little excerpt of, talking about her approach to writing short stories. But I love this quote she gives near the start of this lecture, where she says, your job as a writer is to figure out what your character needs to do and then systematically prevent them from reaching the goal. And then later on she says, your goal is to be mean. So as the author, your goal is to be quite a mean person to these characters. How do you feel about that? Do you feel that kind of seems like the writing process you went through as you were identifying character needs, right? So you're talking about the love romance that developed, or that wanted that kind of maybe unrequited love, and then systematically preventing that from happening.
I don't think I'm as extreme as Mary. I don't like being mean to my characters, not because they're my characters even, but when I'm reading a book or watching a movie, there's there's a point that I hit if there are too many complications or too many obstacles in the ways of the characters where I get frustrated on the character's behalf. I'll give you an example. I would genuinely love, to watch a heist movie where they actually just seamlessly pull off the heist and nothing goes wrong. I know that sounds really weird, but I think because I'm the sort of person who likes planning and organising and being meticulous about things that I do, I watch a heist movie and these characters, they're planning out the perfect heist, and then something goes wrong when they're doing it, and I go, no, that's so annoying. I would be so angry if that happened to me. And look, you're right, to a certain extent, though, you can't have a story if some obstacles are not to be overcome, and I think the characters' goals, if they are to achieve them in the end, will only feel meaningful to the readers if the goals have been earned, like if a certain amount of work has gone into obtaining them. But I think that's why I like really character-based goals, like goals about relationships or emotional growth or something internal to the character, because then, it's less of like, oh, I want this external thing and external forces are preventing me from getting it, and it's more just organically I have to grow as a person to get what I want or to become who I want. And like I said earlier, I also just am an impatient author. I get too annoyed if the story takes too long to resolve. So I sort of have like a mental maximum number of obstacles that I'll put in the way, and I like to give off the impression that the characters are always making progress towards their goal, even if they haven't quite got there yet. The one thing that is different with Two Bodies, Three Falls, though, is that it's a love triangle, and so everyone cannot get what they want unless they end up in this weird, possessive, polyamorous relationship where there's two people living in one body, and I just think that's too ethically complicated, and so that's like one exception to my own set of rules where, someone's going to have to get thwarted in the end in some way. Or are they?
Yes, because I'm thinking you have classic stories like King Arthur and Lancelot and Guinevere, the love triangle.
Yeah.
And it's disastrous.
They can't all win.
Yeah, and in fact everyone kind of loses.
Yeah.
Were there love triangles that you had in mind as you were plotting, or was there a love triangle that you'd come across in fiction that...
weirdly, nothing from any mainstream sort of book at all, or movie, or even a love triangle between young people or anything. I think what I had in mind was one or two or three really obscure movies or TV series that I'd watched at the time, like political dramas, or I'm trying to think of an example. There was one, I think it was either The Politician's Wife or The Politician's Husband. I think it was The Politician's Husband, and I think it had David Tennant in it. And there was another one, Blackpool, which was a musical murder mystery series, which also had David Tennant in it, and that tells you everything you need to know. I was going through a David Tennant phase at the time. So I was watching his entire discography, and he's been in multiple weird little dramas where there's an adulterous love triangle. So usually, I think it was different. He played different characters in each of the love triangles, but there's a married couple who are unhappy, and then someone else comes in, and a guy comes in and falls in love with the wife, and the wife's sick of her husband, so she falls in love with the other guy, and they have an affair, or something like that. I can't even remember if The Politician's Husband had this, but I'm sure that it did, because I remember not liking it. But anyway, I'd always get frustrated because I'd think, why is it that just because two people have a very intense emotional attraction to each other, why does it mean that it's okay for a marriage to be broken up and potentially a family to be broken up, and the plot wants to make sure that you're okay with that. So they're like, oh, it's fine. Like, the husband and wife didn't even like each other in the first place. It's better this way. But the attitude beneath these stories is always, if you are in love with someone, then whatever you do to get them is okay. And I wanted to challenge that. So I was like, what if a ghost falls in love with a human and she literally steals someone's body to pursue him? Is that okay, just because she's in love with him?
Yeah, look, that means justify the ends dilemma. And it's such a juicy one to bring up in the romance genre.
Yeah. It's all about desires.
But I do agree with your point that it can be really frustrating for a reader or audience person sometimes when there's too much suffering, where there's constant barriers put up. I think that's one of the big reasons the Walking Dead TV series lost so many people from it that it just became relentless in its suffering that it inflicted on its characters.
Yeah, long-running stories often fall into that trap.
Yeah, and it became one which, the audience didn't want to finally endure. That there were too many sudden reversals of luck and the characters getting beaten down, and up to a point, as you were saying, as a reader, you want to feel the characters have deserved their boon of knowledge or their heroic accomplishment, but there's a point at which it does feel unpleasant to see that much suffering.
Yeah, definitely.
The emotions, I think, as you're watching it, difficult to empathize with. So let's have a look then at how we can break apart this idea of the goals that a character has. So to go back to Mary Robinette Cowell's ideas, I want to play her definition of structure. So in this short excerpt, she talks about this concept she refers to as the MICE structure, M-I-C-E, where each part of this stands for an aspect of what a character in a story is trying to achieve. So we'll have a quick listen, and then we'll talk about your own work in terms of how, if we could break that down in terms of the MICE structure, and also through skeleton keys. So this is from Brandon Sanderson's lecture series on writing.
Cool.
And here, this is lecture number 7, where he's invited special guest instructor Mary Robinette Cowell in to talk about how to do short stories within science fiction and fantasy. And at this point, she's described how you have to be mean as a writer to your characters.
Mean, at least.
And now she's breaking down what she thinks, or she feels is the main structure conventions which play out in a story. And as you do each one of the MICE aspects, you're opening a box which requires some form of closing that box at the end. But we'll first listen to how she defines these. We might interrupt her as she's defining each one and reflect on them with our own examples. Okay.
You have watched the Olympics. Very different experiences. But you're reading them or watching them for different things.
All right, sorry, I skipped that. She's
Just
here
the way
talking
that
about
you're
why
doing something
a
exceptional.
short story is
And the other,
different
you
from a
want this
novel.
long
right.
fix, right? And that's an important thing to understand. So, now we get to some structure. Ready? We have the MICE quotient. Whee! Okay, the MICE quotient is an organizational theory that explains pretty much every story, fiction and nonfiction. So I'm going to talk about this through a lens of fiction, but I'll let you know that if you have to write an essay, it works for nonfiction too. Now, stories are made up of, click, 4 elements: milieu, inquiry, character, and event, mixed in different proportions. So these elements can help you determine where a story starts and stops, and the kind of conflicts that your characters face. Click. So a milieu story begins when your character enters a place, and it ends when your character exits the place. These are things like Gulliver's Travels, Around the World in 80 Days, classic examples. Click.
All right, so what do you think about the milieu concept? This is where, as she's saying, like in Gulliver's Travels, Around the World in 80 Days, a character almost goes through like a portal. I guess you put Alice in Wonderland in this, and finds themselves in a different world that they can live in. So I guess in the case of in the case of Three Skeleton Keys, is there a type of milieu here? Do the characters want to go somewhere?
Well, I think when Vincent Price goes to the lighthouse, I mean, I think the story starts with him being there, but at some point he must have come to the lighthouse to work there. And
kind of retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all the characters, well, certainly the other really the character that wanted to get away from everyone. And
you know what? It's actually the rats. The rats experience the coming into the place and going out again. They're the real main characters.
Because I do think you could do that thing of flipping who the main character is. Yeah, I think for the character of the rats, their story is one of milieu.
Yeah.
They're on the boat, and they want to get off the boat for food and
shelter,
and probably space. So they do hit this rock, and then, yes, their milieu is, can we get into the lighthouse? Their whole motivation is get into the lighthouse where they know there's food and shelter.
And then they get attacked by these cruel men who begrudge them their food.
I love it. Eilidh, perfect. Yes, so we do have a milieu occurring particularly, and I guess, yes, for our characters in the lighthouse, they also equally want to figure out a way they can get, like they're trapped in the lighthouse. So they would wish to get off the lighthouse.
Yeah, that's true.
But they realize they can't get off the lighthouse. So they do definitely want to be somewhere else, although it's not really strongly articulated.
Is the milieu an idea about going on a journey, though, or is it about experiencing a location?
Location. Yeah, I think here she's specifically saying if your characters are trying to achieve something and that aspect of achievement is specifically based around locations. So I guess you're around the world in 80 days. They're literally going from location to location to location to win that challenge of being able to travel spatially within 80 days. Gulliver's Travels, it's been a long time since I've read that, but it is about him going to a different land.
A few different lands, actually.
Right, yeah. And I guess the one I remember is the one with all the small people.
Yeah, I think there's one with big people, one with small people. I think there's 4. I can't remember the third one. Maybe it was like horse people. And the fourth one, which never gets talked about, is one where it's got these like advanced alien kind of people. I could be making this up, but I'm sure he goes to a place where there's these like non-human creatures that treat humans like dirt, basically. They're like unevolved life forms compared to this other race.
So that's milieu. So now we'll move to the I part of mice.
So knowing where milieu stories end, this also tells you the kind of conflicts that go in the middle. Because your job as a writer is to figure out what your character needs to do and then systematically prevent them from reaching the goal. The moment that goal is reached, the story is over. So you are just mean.
Actually, so yeah, just on milieu, so yes, and here's a classic thing, you've got to be mean. So I guess with Around the World in 80 Days, the story is all about their difficulty getting from location to location. Yeah. Right? So
Jules Verne really loved practical problem solving. Is the vibe that I'm picking up.
Yeah, actually true. Yeah. So within milieu is one of the other criteria. I think it's the one we're going to get to next, which is inquiry. Yeah. So the challenges of them going from location to location, questions require answers or challenges. So yeah. Are there any, does locations, milieu, play an important role? Like, were there any location-based things which opened up?
In Two Bodies, Three Falls, you mean?
Yes.
I was thinking about that. Geographically, no, but there is a really strong milieu component, which is that the ghost, Marianne, even though she lives in the same city as the other main characters, for the length of the book, once she takes over Evelyn's body, she experiences the daily lives and activities and families of Xander and Evelyn, and she's brought into this, whole world of weird rituals and social activities and things that she doesn't really understand, and her experiencing what are very ordinary things for Xander and Evelyn, they become very bizarre through Marianne's eyes, although objectively they are also really bizarre.
Yeah. So these are very much place-based cultural customs.
Yeah.
Fish out of water.
Yeah, absolutely.
Type ideas. Great. Well, I think we're checking off this list nicely. So M. So now I think Mary Kowal is moving on to I now.
Click. So milieu conflict, if it ends when you exit a place, all of the stuff in the middle is about difficulty with navigating that space. It's people getting confused about how to finding the exit. It's trouble surviving in the place. It's attempting to navigate. Anything around place is going to be milieu. Anything where you're struggling with the space you're in. Inquiry stories, click. Inquiry stories are driven by questions. They begin when a character has a question, and they end when they answer it. Aha! So these are, it's a super complicated structure, but it's things like Sherlock Holmes, murder mysteries. These are classic inquiry stories. Click.
So in terms of 3 skeleton keys, we have some puzzle in terms of how they're going to defend themselves against the rats.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right? Yeah.
Aside from that, it's a very...
It's not, yeah, there's not too many. I mean, there's the point where Vincent Price hears a smash and they've started to gnaw through the wood, and so someone has to get the metal.
Do they know that there's going to be rats before the ship comes in, or is the main question around, what's that coming out of the blue? What's on the ship? Who's on the ship? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
I think that's
so it is a surprise.
the
Yeah.
biggest question. Yeah.
So yeah, they're first mystified as to why this boat isn't trying to avoid the rocks. Then they realize it's abandoned. But then they see on the boats the heaving mass of rats, and at which point, yes, they become increasingly worried that, oh my God, if this boat does crash, it's going to release all the rats, which is what happens. And then it is that series of plans they try to do to save themselves. So lock the doors, and try and just wait it out.
Yeah. And then their question is, are we going to survive?
Yeah, look, and at the point at which we're at 3 skeleton keys, they've reached this point where it seems increasingly hopeless for them, that they're not going to survive. So there is an inquiry conflict, but our heroes aren't really given a kind of MacGyver-esque solution. Like, it's not like they then build this great device to save themselves. Yeah. And as we reach the end of it, yes, we'll hear that the end isn't resolved by any intelligence of heroes. Like, it's nothing they do that enables them to get out of it.
Man is powerless against nature, etc.
Yeah. What about in your own book? Were the characters able to solve dilemmas?
Yeah. Actually, though, first I'd like to give a cheeky plug for my next book, which is coming out pretty soon, Arcadia. That one is very strongly an inquiry-based book. There's, the inciting incident in the very first chapter, which is like a page or 2 long, is all about raising a question, and the whole rest of the book is spent trying to answer the question. The question is, what's going on? And it's a suspense story built around the answer to this question.
Great.
So I'm really excited for people to read that in the next couple of months or so when it gets released. As for 2 Bodies, 3 Fools, there's probably 2 questions that come up. The first one is, what is Marianne's backstory? That is something that starts to come up pretty much as soon as she takes over Evelyn's body, and Evelyn's like, oh my gosh, who is this? Why is she in my body? What's she doing? What is this dark past that she has? Why is the Ghost Mafia after her? There's different factions within the Mafia as well, so why are they all after her? That question doesn't really get answered until probably around the 3rd act of the book. And then sort of overlapping with that, once some of the other characters start to realise that there's a ghost in Evelyn's body, the other question is, how are we going to get her out of here? Like, how are we going to resolve this situation? Both of those questions do get answered by the end of the book.
But there'd probably be a lot of times those answers are denied, right?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a recurring plot point where, just for comic relief really, where Evelyn constantly is talking to Marianne inside their shared brain, and she's like, who are these people who are after you? Why do they keep messing up my life? Just tell me what's going on. And Marianne is like, nah, I'm not going to tell you anything. I don't like you very much. I'm in a bad mood. I'm not going to talk right now. And that's the entire reason why we don't know what's going on.
Her power, is denying those answers. So let's hear how Mary Robinette Cowell explains this inquiry conflict.
So for an inquiry conflict, your goal is to keep your character from finding the answer. They're lied to. They can't understand the answer. The answer leads to a dead end. Those are what red herrings are. Click. Character stories.
So this is her third from the mice thing. So C for character. So we'll hear how she defines character-driven structures.
Character stories are driven by angst. Oh, my life is so hard. In the simplest form, they begin when a character is unhappy with themselves, and they end when they're happy. I'll never be popular. No, I'm popular.
How did you feel about the significance of character in the structure of your book? Was it one of angst to happiness?
It's probably less angst at self and more, as we were talking about before, more like angst, like relational angst.
Will I ever find love?
Will I ever find love? Will I ever, be allowed to just go on my merry way without these random people, ghosts invading my life and making things difficult? There's not too much in the way of, I'm unhappy with myself. Maybe the ghost. Actually, the ghost, you know what? That's it. The ghost literally haunts the earth because she was too angry or too upset to die. Like the sort of idea behind ghosts in this book is that when someone dies in very tragic or traumatic circumstances and they're not at peace with that, or they've got unresolved business or whatever, they can't, move on to the other world or whatever. So their ghost form remains in our world. And so another sort of question or another conflict that's being resolved throughout the story is, why is Marianne not at peace? Is being in a relationship with Xander going to give her what she wants? Is that going to make her happy? What's going to make her happy? What's going to help her move on?
That's so well put, yes, because the ghost trope is that status quo. Your status quo has been thrown out, or something that you need to get that character back to status quo to return them to some sense of equanimity or balance or go to the light. So the character.
Ticking all the boxes so far.
So the final one, the E one. Let's hear how that is defined. There's probably something more about character first, but we'll go to E.
But really, they begin with an identity shift, a shift in how the character self-defines. And they end when the character's self-definition solidifies, when they have a new understanding of self. So these are coming-of-age stories, romances. Those are classic character stories. Click. So your character is trying to change. Stop them. Don't let them break out of their role. Fill them with self-loathing. Have the change backfire.
So in terms of Two Bodies, Three Falls, the change backfires in a way? Like she wanted to inhabit the body to be able to get the romance, but it backfires.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, basically she starts up with this very simple idea, and it's meant to be characteristic of the lack of thinking that a person can do when they're really, really infatuated with someone. She just thinks, I'm so in love with this boy. I need him. I can't think about anything else. I'm going to steal this body. Oh, crap, it's actually really hard just living life in this body and living this person's life for them. And I've got all these people after me, and this boy is not responding to my advances. I don't know how to make him love me. I don't even know how to tell him that it's me and not his friend. Because Xander spends most of the book thinking that it's just Evelyn being weird the whole time. And eventually Marianne starts to get to the point where she's like, is this relationship even going to be worth it? Is Xander even going to be all that I think he's going to be? Have I just been chasing, an idea this whole time?
So, again, ticking the boxes. Yeah. We'll see where we go with E now.
Those are character stories. Now, event stories, click, are driven by action. These begin when the status quo or the sense of normal is disrupted, and they're restored when there's a new status quo. So, oh, and by the way, yes, everyone dies does count as a new status quo. But it is very much an external threat. Character is internal, this is external. So by this point, you understand the drill. Click. Don't let your character restore the status quo. You have fight scenes, you have chase scenes, you have explosions, you have more disruptions to status quo. Again, you're just mean. That is your job.
So I guess in terms of Three Skeleton Keys, it's a strongly event story in terms of the event being the rats getting off the boat and then action, right? So then,
Absolutely.
you know, the emotional and physical costs of trying to defend yourself against these rats and the rats getting through and the rats sound of the rats and so forth, it really plays that up quite strongly.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about events for Two Bodies, Three Falls?
Well, I think that event is probably the strongest element in Two Bodies, Three Falls. If we think of, there's sort of two events. One is Marianne takes over Evelyn's body, but the second, more significant in the sense of more external event is, oh, well, because all of these ghosts were after Marianne, now they're after Evelyn and her family and Xander's family, and they're taking over bodies left, right, and centre, and they're making life difficult for everyone. What are we going to do?
Action occurs, they've got to fight and defend themselves, and that they can't at certain points, right? There's constant, so you're mean.
I don't like to think about it, but yeah, pretty mean.
What did you think about the My structure? Does it make sense?
I think so. I try not to write stories with all of these ideas and theories in my head on a conscious level, because I think I at least tend to get very stressed then about, oh no, am I doing it right? But it comes out as you're writing. If you're thinking, all right, I've got to get this character from A to B. What sort of growth do they need to go through to get there? What is the point of this story? What are we trying to achieve here? Usually that is going to involve some mix of all four of these components that Mary Robinette has pointed out. So it seems sound.
It's so interesting because I do think that, as she goes on to say, as you open, like, stories will often have all four of them going on at different points in the story, but as you open each one of them, you've got to remember to try and resolve them, to try and provide the question for the inquiry, to have the events wrap up. And she was saying, sometimes when you're watching a film or reading a book, you can be stuck with all these long resolutions, like the third Lord of the Rings film, the third one, Fellowship of the
Return of the King.
Return of the King. So much of it seems to be one ending after another.
Yeah.
Like the final 15 minutes or so is just trying to close all those boxes that they'd opened in the previous two movies.
Yeah, there's lots.
Yeah. And it can weigh on an audience member, right? It's like, oh, this is taking a long time.
Yeah.
And it's just because there's so many boxes they opened up.
And there's a magic line as well. If you cross the line, you have too much resolution. People get annoyed about that. They get annoyed if there's not enough resolution, but they get annoyed if there's too much. You've got to leave a little bit of room for imagination.
So we're near at the end of the show. Some great insights there, Eilidh, in terms of Two Bodies, Three Falls. You've mentioned, though, future work that's coming up. So we have a inquiry-based work around the corner.
Arcadia coming soon, as soon as I stop being busy. And
you were mentioning there's an audio that you're getting some wheels going for Two Bodies, Three Falls?
Yeah. So there's a big market for audiobooks, and a lot of people have said to me, oh, I don't read books, but I'd love to listen to an audiobook if you ever do one. So I'm doing an audiobook. I'm in the middle of recording Two Bodies, Three Falls myself as we speak. It's a slow process, but I think we'll have a really good product at the end, and people will be able to listen to me read it in my own voice, which works because everyone who's read it on paper says that it sounds like my voice anyway. I've also got some friends together, and we're going to be filming a short film in March. So stay tuned for some updates on that over the coming year.
And is it in the same world as the work you've been working in?
Well, it's in Hobart. So yeah, like most of my stories are in Hobart in one way or another, but it doesn't have any ghosts. It's just all about, well, it is about university students and all of their very challenging social interactions that they have to go through. It's a kind of a dark comedy.
Fantastic. Well, Eilidh, as those projects reach fruition, you'll have to let us know so we can
Love to.
promote them. And in the meantime, how can people go and find out about you if they want to find out more?
Well, I'm still in the middle of having a website put together, so it hasn't launched yet, but eventually if you Google my name, I'm sure eilidhdoreen.com will come up for you. In the meantime, I'm on Instagram, just at eilidh.doureen, eilidh.direen. And if you Google my name, or if you Google Two Bodies, Three Fools, I'll come up. You can find me on Amazon or Booktopia or any of those places online where you can buy books.
Great. And we'll put some of these details on the show notes, which you can get to via YouTube or Twitch, as well as podcasting. So this has been us. Thanks very much for listening. This has been Dr. Craig, joined by the wonderful Eilidh Doureen.
Well done.
And this has been Media Mothership on Edge Radio for another week. You can listen to previous episodes of the show on YouTube, Twitch, as well as edgeradio.org.au, or your podcast provider of choice. Find out more about Media Mothership on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed listening to Pop Culture Deep Dives, also listen on Wednesdays at 10 to Millennial Think, and after that, Pop Topic Taz by the Tasmanian Pop Culture Group. And keep listening now to Edge Radio. Coming up next, we have Adrian with his show You Can't Sit Down, which will have all manner of excitement and cool listening to it. So this has been Edge Radio. Keep listening to more great hits.